Seth has a very interesting story. It's the ZipRecruiter's flight path. So we're going to take a little bit of time and listen carefully and learn. And I feel like this is very insightful, specifically for organizations and teams that are actually kind of like this point where they discover, well, we might need something that is different than what we have because for scalability, reproducibility, and so on. And Seth and his team have gone down that path and discovered, obviously, Flyte. And we would love to hear a little bit from you, Seth, today about what your journey was so far, what the pain points were that you encountered, and what basically got you onto the path to Flyte, where you are today, and maybe in hindsight, at some of the learnings, some of the 2020 pieces that you want to share with other users who are in the same situation. Stage is yours.
Thanks, Martin. Like I said, I'm Seth, and I work at ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter is a online recruiting service that provides a marketplace for job seekers and employers to connect with each other. ZipRecruiter has served over 100 million job seekers and over 2.8 million businesses. And I've been working at ZipRecruiter for over 5 years now. I've been working primarily in infrastructure, so doing DevOps, and then about almost 2 years ago now, transitioned to an MLOps team. So I will share my screen.
So let me ask you that right away. So transferring to the MLOps team, so was that a new team, or did you guys create that team from scratch? How did that happen?
Yeah, we created it from scratch. Like we saw that there was, a need for, MLOps, because like our DevOps and our CI/CD system was pretty mature, but it didn't really tackle all the issues that are specific to ML, because not everything can be done in this sort of like GitOps style way that we had been doing. I needed something a little more dynamic.
Awesome.
Cool. Let's see, so share my screen. All right, can you see it? Cool. All right, yeah, so like ZipRecruiter does a lot of machine learning. Like we have a lot of different use cases that are critical to the business. Like we do NLP, like resume parsing, job description parsing. And this is actually like pretty interesting area. We're still doing development in this area because the language used in like resumes, for example, is actually a lot different than normal English. So parsing it is a bit different. And then, we have classifiers to like try to canonize job titles, since there can be so much variation between different job titles, and also try to figure out from things like job descriptions whether the job is like remote job, so that can help with filtering. Of course, at the core of our business is like matching jobs to job seekers. And then there's like ranking, like the search results of jobs, and also ranking job seekers when we present them to employers, since you can get a lot of applications and you want to filter the best job seekers to the top. And we also have like fraud detection, because we take, job seekers safety like very seriously at our company. And we want to protect them as much as possible. So, protect them from like scammers who are posting fake jobs and trying to rip them off. And we, of course, have like many other types of models, for other things like predicting click-through rate and things like that. So like, as I was saying before, for 2 years ago, we didn't really have much MLOps standards, but we have like all these cross-functional teams who work pretty independently from each other. And as a result, they have various levels of maturity. Like we have one team, for example, that is like way more mature than the rest, and has like a lot of technologies that they use, and it's pretty advanced. And then we have a lot of teams that are like have pretty bare bones and are don't really have great ML ops practices. So our team was like formed 2 years ago to sort of address this, and we've just sort of one by one been tackling each problem within the machine learning lifecycle. Like we started with experimentation, and then we started moving to model training, sort of like in a logical flow. But then we sort of took a break from training and went to model deployment for like compliance reasons. We needed better auditing of like what models were actually getting deployed to production. And then we moved our way back to training. Like I said, we have pretty sophisticated like CI/CD infrastructure, and this, some of this includes like Airflow for like data pipelines, and we actually had to like basically build our own Kubernetes plugin because we were using Airflow on Kubernetes before there was like an official plugin. So like our way of using Airflow is very custom, and it's completely declarative. Like we define DAGs and YAML, and we just saw that this wasn't really going to work for ML in general. It was like super hard to like express things in just YAML, and like the super advanced team, they had like even created an internal framework on top of Airflow, our version of Airflow, to try to address some of these concerns. And some of these are like still inherent to Airflow. So we started looking for some new solution, and we thought about, well, maybe we'll just move everyone to Airflow. We already have a bunch of infrastructure ready for it. We can do that. But then we started like looking at the actual use cases of like all these ML training pipelines, and saw that like Airflow wasn't really fitting the bill. It doesn't have like the kind of versioning that we need. Machine learning training can be highly experimental, so you need to have all kinds of different versions that could be active at the same time, and that concept just doesn't really exist in Airflow. You only have like basically the latest version at any given time. And then another issue is that like you can't really pass data around very well in Airflow, like between tasks. It's completely up to the task to take care of it. Airflow does have like the XComs feature, which is kind of like this weird interface of passing references to data, but you can't really pass like large amounts of data through that. Basically only references to S3 or whatever object storage you use. So yeah, we have like a lot of code that's just taking care of persisting data to S3 and then passing around this reference and then downloading it from S3 and deserializing it. And there's just a ton of code like that everywhere. And then you can't really see what the lineage is between the task of the data, and it's like really hard to tell like what the actual data inputs are to the task and which outputs it has, and you couldn't really figure this out unless you actually started looking at the code, which is not a great thing. And then ML training can be really expensive in terms of compute resources and time, and also money. And so if you're trying to like do all these expensive tasks, and then you have like some you don't want to like repeat that work all the time if you don't have to. And so Airflow doesn't really have anything like that. The internal framework that we had did try to do some amount of caching, but it was really a really primitive mechanism of just looking for like a success file in S3. It didn't really have like content-based hashing or anything like that. And then, you know, like our it's hard to do like remote development with our like Airflow stack, because of like the way that like DAGs are deployed, and we want to keep things separate from what's deployed through our CI/CD system. And so it would take a lot of work for us to be able to sort of recreate a like Airflow in Kubernetes development environment. And so we started looking at other solutions to see like, is there anything that just sort of has these things out of the box? And we evaluated multiple solutions, and one of them is Flyte. And of course, all those things that were red X's are check marks for Flyte. These are all just like, you know, batteries included features, which was really nice. And then it also has all these other nice things like the intuitive Python SDK. Like writing a workflow in Flyte feels just like writing a script in Python. It's like very intuitive. And then we really like this like automatic IO management, where like things are sort of just like persisted to this like intermediate storage layer on your behalf. Like it just feels like you're returning values from a function call, but so it's completely happening in the background. You don't even need to think about it, which is really nice for like our data scientists, because like one of our major goals is to be able to have data scientists work independently and not have to rely on a data engineer or an ML engineer to turn their models and training pipelines into like a pipeline. So like we want them to be able to just like author their pipeline and it to be low effort from moving from like something like a notebook environment to a pipeline. And then the interface is like very clearly defined with Flyte, which we like, and like we can keep the orchestration layer separate from the actual model code. We did see examples of in like our own models where people were like dealing with like S3 paths for things inside their actual like model classes, which was sad to see. But yeah, with Flyte, it's really easy to just see it, sort of keep this like orchestration stuff completely separate from your model code. So you can potentially use a different orchestration tool in the future. And then, you know, Flyte is already Kubernetes native, which is great for us. Everything we do is in Kubernetes. We even do development in Kubernetes. Like we have tooling that can basically create something sort of like a virtual cluster within a cluster where it'll spawn namespaces that are basically copies of our apps, and we do that development in those namespaces as if we were the actual app. And so like to be able to do something similar like that would be ideal for pipelines as well. And then it has a Spark integration already, which is nice because we use a lot of Spark. We already like have our own sort of implementation of like Spark on Kubernetes that was separate from the Spark operator. But like anything that would be like integrated with the workflow would be nice. So basically from there, we went to, we sort of narrowed down our choices and we started POCs for the different solutions that we were looking at. And so like for Flyte, the Flyte POC specifically, we started with like the sandbox, the Flyte sandbox, just to sort of test out the examples and, you know, verify that, you know, it works the way that we think it works based on the documentation. and we really liked what we saw there. So then we moved on to sort of like the next phase of, well, let's actually deploy it on our dev infrastructure. And I think some companies might find that like kind of a weird thing, that we would have to like actually have a full blown deployment for a POC. But for our company, it's sort of like the first real, like almost like a litmus test to see like, will this thing actually work for us? Because our Kubernetes environment is very locked down, and we have like very opinionated usage of it, and we have like a lot of security constraints that we deal with. Like, you know, we have a gatekeeper running in our cluster that prevents certain types of resources from being created if they don't have the right settings. So like when we were setting up Flyte, you know, we had to fight with gatekeeper a little bit. When this happens pretty much anytime we deploy third-party software on our cluster. And usually when that happens, like, you know, sometimes we'll find out that third-party software required something that we're not comfortable supporting. Like they could have, you know, some kind of syscuttles that they need that would give access to the host or something, and then would basically give them like root on that Kubernetes node. That's happened before. So and we had to like basically say, okay, we're not going to go with that product. Yeah, like, so it took a pretty long time. We got a lot of help from Keithan and Hatham and the rest of the union, and so like I just want to have a special thanks to them. They helped us tremendously, and you know, like we had to like pare down the RBAC quite a bit, just to be like the most minimal set of permissions to be able to run workflows in separate namespaces. Like we have our own tooling for standing up clusters and managing them. So we don't use Flyte to manage clusters, and we have a separate cluster for each environment. So like our development, our staging, and our production environments are all separate clusters and separate VPCs and everything. They're completely network isolated. So we're not using domains the way Flyte would use them out of the box. We do have like one use case for domains right now, which is that in the development environment, we have like a domain where it's like workflows that were deployed through our CI/CD system. And then we have a domain that for like workflows that were fast registered for development purposes. We just prefer to keep those domains separate so that like things that were deployed to dev as like a reference server for other people to work against aren't affected by or like, you know, messed up by things that were deployed from someone's feature branch that is not even on the main branch yet. But yeah, so then once we got with Flyte, but in parallel to that effort of just standing up the Flyte infrastructure, I was working on refactoring a real model training pipeline to be able to use Flyte. So we took an Airflow pipeline, an existing one, and well, we took the model from it and basically just ported it to Flyte. So it's like, you know, pretty standard, simple pipeline. It's shown here. Has a data preparation step, processing step, and then finally like a learning step or for the training. And but this was using the internal framework that was on top of Airflow before. And so it was quite a bit of work just to sort of like decouple it from that framework first, so that we could then apply Flyte to it sort of natively, and then like what we got was over 66% reduction in orchestration code when we moved to Flyte. So that was like a huge win. And we were like really excited about that. And it worked really well. Like we really liked like, you know, how we can split up our Spark task and have separate Spark configurations for them. So if like the downstream task doesn't need as much resources, that's really great. Let's see. Yeah, so then now I'll talk about the like custom tooling that we've sort of like been built, because, or I guess before I get there, obviously we decided to go with Flyte. And so then we're starting to like productionize it. Deploying it itself was sort of like a productionizing step for us because of how strict our infrastructure is. But we needed some additional tooling to make the development experience a bit better. At the time when we started developing tooling, things like PyFlight Run didn't exist. So it was like really painful for us to, like we had a script that would do the serialization and the registration of like our task and workflows. But it was kind of like a ugly script, and then it was kind of like hard to generalize for like all of our different apps, because like within our infrastructure, like we like map apps to namespaces, so every single app has its own namespace and has like its own IAM roles and things like that, and secrets associated with that namespace. So like we created basically an app generator that generates a Flyte app with like, you know, its own Docker files and Kubernetes manifests. And one of the manifests is like a CI/CD job that you know, handles serialization and registration. So like whenever someone merges to main, for example, their Flyte code is automatically serialized and registered with the Flyte admin in the dev cluster. And then we also created a wrapper for the Flyte remote class from FlyteKit. Excuse me. And this is sort of similar to PyFlight Run. It does like serialization, registration, and like remote execution. But this like lives inside the same like workflow code that you have. So I can actually do like a demo of this part. So here is like, you know, just a hello world workflow. Has like, you know, just simple greeting. And then I have like, you know, this custom like wrapper for the Flyte remote object called Flyte Launcher. And then I could just pass it a launch plan, and then optionally pass it inputs. And then this is, you know, inside the main, so it won't run normally during like the CI/CD flow where this would be registered. It's just for like local based development. So so I can go to my command line, and then I can just run this workflow like a script, and I can do that now. And so it's popped up in my browser to the execution page for what I just launched on the command line. So now this task should be running remotely on the cluster. It may take a while for things to spin up. Oh, there it succeeded. And then you can see the input and, you know, the output, hello. But yeah, like this is like pretty flexible like this is like really integrated with our CI/CD infrastructure too, because like it automatically figures out like versioning based on how our CI/CD system works, and like in automatically figures out like what the Docker image tag would be, and things like that. And also like intelligently figures out what the actual like code dependencies are, so that when it's like syncing the code into the container, it's not syncing our entire repo. It's only syncing the parts that are relevant to this particular app. Yeah, I guess I forgot to mention before that our company works out of a mono repo. So like that's like a reason why we have a lot of custom tooling, is that a lot of tools don't necessarily work well with a mono repo. So we usually have to make wrappers that sort of narrow the scope of the repo. And that's sort of what I did here with this Flyte launcher. But yeah, this is like pretty flexible. You know, you can use arg parse or whatever library you want to make this more fancy. But yeah, like it hides a lot of like sort of the details of serialization and registration, which with like the sort of built-in Flyte tools can be kind of hairy on the command line with all the different options. Let's see. I have been signed out. Perfect.
No worries. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So then sort of that's what we have now, and it's working pretty well for us. But we think we can actually do better. We want to make this like even more integrated with notebooks. And so like I came up with this idea of like another like sort of wrapper for Flyte Remote. Like I do have like this example that's shown implemented. And basically the idea is that like it's a wrapper not only for Flyte Remote, but also the task decorator and the workflow decorator. And it basically just allows you to optionally pass this additional session object to the workflow or task function. And if that session object is present, then it will use it to auto serialize, register, and remotely execute the task or workflow. And then it will like wait on the result and unpack it and return it. So it's exactly like running it in a Python script. And if that session object is not present, then it just runs locally as normally. So yeah, this is like something that we're going to continue working on and extend for like the for workflow and launch plans, so that we can sort of seamlessly integrate tasks that are defined in libraries with those that are like defined in a notebook. So yeah, I'd be like curious to hear what people's thoughts are on this sort of thing. And then future work that we're interested in doing is like I said, we want to fully integrate with notebooks, since like notebooks are basically the IDE of all of our data scientists. So they always want to start there. And we think if we can let them basically author their workflows from a notebook, then that will like make their lives even easier. And then there's this other sort of idea that's brewing that I'm calling user namespaces. And it's that sort of like what I touched on earlier, that are in our infrastructure, like we create sort of like replicas of like app namespaces for each user that's developing on that app, and I'm not sure how, like, what the timeline is, because it's another team that's involved in making this change, but at some point, these sort of like user namespace will have like have the same like secret interface, where like the secrets will have the same name, and the IAM roles will have or the service accounts will have the same name, but like the actual like secret values will be different for the user namespaces. This is like to keep this is like, for security reasons, so that like people can't, for example, access a database with like the same credentials and privileges as the actual app, and can't do anything destructive there. Right now, it's just like basically a copy of the app secret. And so like how this like ties into Flyte is that currently, like with development, like a fast registration sort of runs, they run in the actual app namespace. So this could potentially be problematic for us in the future if this sort of enforcement for like compliance reasons and things requires us to like run in a actual like user namespace, sort of like our other tooling requires. So we're sort of trying to brainstorm ahead of time, like of potentially ways we could maybe run workflows from a project, which is mapped to an app for us. Run workflows for like a project, but in a different namespace, but like otherwise with the same like configuration. So yeah, that's something we'd be interested to know if like other companies or other members of the community have like similar requirements. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Seth, this was a wealth of information, super insightful. I think we have a few questions here, and we just want to see, Kathan, you had earlier a comment here about Yi, that when you saw something that Seth is working on, obviously we want to contribute in some area, but Kathan, what other feedback do you have for Seth?
Firstly, Seth, thank you. There was a complete like start to end picture of how your journey was, and it's good for us to know, at least as a community, where we can improve. And like we've been slowly working and chipping at the problem, and we think we have a huge roadmap over the next year to further chip, but we'd love to collaborate. Like please communicate, and we'd love to collaborate. Like for example, I think I don't know if you guys use Bazel for monorepo, but Toyota and there's one other team that uses monorepo. They build Bazel build plugins for Flyte, and I think Stripe is using it as well. I'm not 100% sure, but Nick's here.
Yeah, for us, it's like it's very language dependent. So like we have like several languages that all have like guilds and communities within ZipRecruiter, and so we all have like separate tooling for like building things. So like I think there maybe Bazel has used it a little bit for some C++ stuff, but nothing outside of that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it's open source too. It's under the Flyte. We need to give it some love. We haven't given the Bazel build plugin a lot of love, or even advertised it well enough. I think it needs to be promoted a little better, because I know there are companies who use Bazel. Other thing, the session stuff that he showed, really interesting. It almost as if you took Yi and I, we were discussing that some days ago, like probably a couple months ago, and he's constantly saying, I want this session thing, I want this session thing. And I was like, we've not really, and we've been working on how to get it from Jupyter notebooks into the code, and yet keep it seamless and clean, and like all the properties that we want to keep, which is repeatable and reproducible. So we are very interested in that. If you would be open to sharing, let's actually deep dive into what you have. We could fast track it and help you from our side. We love this line of thinking. So
sure, yeah, sure. Be happy to. Like at the moment, it's like very specific to like our own infrastructure, but like the concept of like the Flyte session is like it's like a very thin wrapper. It's so yeah, I could see how it could be like incorporated into the OSS.
Yeah, we could make it like having actually a user with specific use cases that they want to have for their infrastructure actually makes it even better to build it in the open source, because what happens is you build it in the open source with an open source point of view, but add hooks so that your use case just continues to work. And then I'm sure when we add documentation, other people who want to do the same can get it done in like a few minutes like that. And we are like, this is extremely exciting. And I think Niels also had a comment on this. Evan had a comment. I'm sure other people are thinking about this all the time. But that was, we are interested. And the last user per user thing, I think there was some other team that also wanted that. So I will try to remember and find. Sometimes I talk to teams and I forget, but I have it in my notes. So I will connect you with that, with them. And yeah, it sounds interesting also, like, because security is one of the, we want to operate under zero trust essentially as a system too. It's very hard to build open source systems with zero trust, you probably realize, because people, zero trust causes a lot of friction on getting onboarded. And most people don't see the long-term benefits, they only see the short-term benefits of onboarding problems or short-term problems rather. And so, it's a big trade-off that we always have to make as a community. But we'd love to hear how and where we can actually add it as a nice feature that keeps on getting added in the future. But Niels or anybody else, that's it from my end. But thank you for the amazing.
So fantastic. So we had time. I wanted to sneak in one more question for you, Seth. This is kind of like a hindsight question. If you would meet your old me from 2 years ago, what advice would you give yourself now, knowing all the stuff that you know, or people in a similar situation, obviously?
Yeah, so like I think let's see. You prepped me for this and I forgot what my answer was. I don't know, like for us, it was like it was kind of challenging too, because it wasn't all like a continuous timeline of like doing all this work, because we like started the project and then we just like took a break from it and went to like a different project and then came back. And like so that like sort of like broke our momentum a bit. So I would say like maybe if we hadn't done that, like it would have been smoother. But then again, like I think we were like sort of adopting Flyte prior to 1.0, so like things were changing really rapidly. So we might not even had the same experience if we hadn't like sort of taken a break and come back, because so many things did change. But yeah, like I don't know if that's actually helpful.
It's actually a good point. I mean, obviously people experiment and look at different solutions, and I feel like what you're saying is like, once you deep dive, take it seriously, right? And don't jump around, because until you have really explored. And then an early solution, I think the second takeaway is Flyte has matured. Just like, we have we're way beyond 1.0. 1.1 is out there and working on 1.2, and it's coming out. And so I feel like the other question is for people who are listening here, who are in a similar situation as you are right now. What kind of like data science team or workload, if at any, is there a threshold that you feel like you have to cross to reap any rewards in the future? What comes to mind from your point of view?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Like,
yeah, so let me rephrase it. From basically, using a system like Flyte, what were the, requirements for you internally to say, well, this is so important for our workflow because we have X data scientists and putting them all, their work at scale. with any other system that we don't have right now. We have to come up with an innovation. So what was the threshold? I'm obviously, when you have like 1 or 2 data scientists, that might not have crossed your mind, but I'm just wondering, was there a threshold in terms of, volume that you produce, models that you produce, things that you put in production, or was there not such a thing at all to consider using Flyte?
Oh yeah, like for sure. Like we definitely are trying to like accelerate how quickly we can iterate on model development. Like, because for a lot of our teams, like since they are still so many of them are just doing things in Jupyter notebooks, like which obviously has problems with like reproducibility, but it would take them a while to get that working, and then it would take additional time to hand that off to some other person like an ML engineer, and then have them like refactor all the code into something that's like a pipeline. So it can be like a multi-month long process just to get like a new model created, and so we were looking for something that would be able to make this sort of like development cycle much shorter and simpler, and not require as many handoffs. And so like, we were just looking for, something where we could iterate on like a pipeline and a model sort of like at the same time. And Flyte seemed like it could do that for us. And then when we had like the huge like reduction in like amount of orchestration code that was required to do it, it was just like almost like a no-brainer. Like, yeah, this is obviously better. So like it can't be necessarily a bad decision to move forward.
Great. Okay, fantastic. So Seth, thank you so much for your time. This was super insightful today.